Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of X Minutes of Poetry. So today we'll be talking about a very interesting short story collection by Amanda Lee Colt. I'm sure many of you have probably already heard of it and already read it. It's called Ministry of Moral Panic, and Haoyong and I have decided to discuss two very interesting short stories here. So the first one that we'll be talking about is the Ballad of Arlene and Nelly, which in a glance basically tells the story of a lesbian couple who are kind of in this on and off relationship across time.
Mm-hmm.
And the second short story that we'll also be talking about is titled Siren. So it's about it reimagines the Malayan as this character called Marl, who's actually a transsexual, and Marl is also working in Orchard Towers in this story as a prostitute. So we have two very interesting premises here, and yeah. So
And
maybe
yeah,
you can,
the
yeah.
yeah actually
Sorry.
the reason like these stories are quite interesting is because like it's an overarching theme for the entire short story collection. Like the title itself, Ministry of Moral Panic, it dives into stories of like unorthodox characters, stories that we usually do not hear of in Singapore, which is a highly conformist society. That's why Ministry of Moral Panic being the state enforced values, like we reject those who fall out of the norm. So, for example, queer individuals, sex workers, and a whole array of characters in the collection. So yeah, so that's why the premises for these two stories are that interesting. Yeah, Giovanni can continue.
Right. I think we can jump straight into the first one, the Ballad of Arlene and Nelly. And
Actually, before we
yeah,
talk about it, can you tell me why you
yep.
chose this short story?
I mean, to put it very simply, I think the form of it stood out to me the most.
Oh.
So yeah, the form of it is actually in this question and answer format,
Mm.
and it was also very interesting in terms of the title, right? A ballad.
Yeah.
So I think to elaborate more on the idea of the ballad and the form, we can already like dive straight into our discussion. So firstly, the idea of the ballad, it's this very public form of poetry. It's something that's passed down from generation to generation. It's something that is popular. It's something that's public.
Mm.
So
So it's not Adele ballad, right?
not quite.
Yeah.
And straight away we can already see something kind of like reminiscent of Shakespeare, right? This immortalization of the love story on writing.
Mm.
And it's interesting because by titling the story as a ballad, you already begin to, or you already have thrust the very private, the very individual love story from the private to the more public, to a more universal scale.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it speaks to like the power of literature or art as being having the ability to elevate an individual or even a temporal experience such as a relationship to something that's much more universal and permanent, really.
Mm.
And I think going back to the idea of the question and answer format, yeah, it's interesting because it establishes this sense of duality. So when we think of a question or when we think of answer, we usually don't think of a question as just a question, right? A question has to come with an answer, and an answer has to come with a question. And so just as an answer cannot exist without a question to complement it,
Mm-hmm.
Arlene, one of the characters in the story, cannot, she does not have the ability to actually love without Nelly. So, like,
And Nelly being Arlene's love
yeah.
interest.
And there's a quote here that I think best encapsulates, that very interestingly encapsulates Arlene's inability to actually love without Nelly, where I quote, she wouldn't even allow herself a cat,
Mm.
which is
And
quite
that was, yeah.
quite strange lah. Yeah, you were saying?
And that's under the section, like, the question for that section is, did Arlene have sex in the interim? And then, and then within the answer, it's no, she wouldn't even allow herself a cat. So, like, she rejects intimacy and love, even beyond, like, forging human relationships, even just, like, having a pet. That's also something that's absent from her life after Nelly goes away. Yeah. I'm not sure if the ballad form was that effective for me, though, because maybe in my mind, I associate, like, ballad with something more musical and touching. But the way this short story is written, it felt quite cold, methodical, like just question, answer. Yeah, I don't know, it was lacking something for me. Like if you
I
compare it
think
to Shakespeare's sonnets, for example, I think, I don't know, it just doesn't fit the idea of a ballad to me. Yeah, like
I think it really
having,
depends on you were saying?
because like a ballad is something romantic, right? But then like having question answer, so it felt so logical to me.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what really see in the definition of a ballad. So for example, you are more into the musical, artistic aspect of it.
Yeah.
But when I googled the definition of the word ballad, I think one thing that struck me was how it's characterized by being fragmented. It's characterized by how it's being told in shorter segments. And I think we can go back to the form of the story here, where it takes a more logical flow instead of a chronological flow, as I think you've pointed out just now. And what I thought about it was that it tended to kind of foreground that intangible, abstract nature of love and queer relationships against the objectivity of the question and answer. And I felt that this further illuminated the former, actually. So that sense of abstractivity, that non-linear storyline and the off and on nature of Arlene and Nelly's relationship helped to portray that sense of fragmentation. And of course, this stands in contrast to I think what you've also mentioned just now about the state's need to classify and unify everything under a general banner, right? The idea of conformity.
Yeah. I feel like that is that's an interpretation that appeals to me more, the states, like the classification idea of imposing a structure onto something that you can't really define very clearly, like queer love, queer relationships. So I wouldn't say is the storyline non-linear? Yeah, it is. Okay. It's like, it's not chronological, right? But I guess, yeah. So your way of viewing this is that the way the structure is so artificial when describing a nebulous subject matter emphasizes the nebulousness of queer love, is it? It's like the form, instead of reflecting the nature of the love, draws attention to the contrast between this structure and the lack of the unclarity of the love. Is that? Yeah. Okay. Can.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense now. Because if we're going with the idea that the form reflects the subject matter, like if you go with like a non-linear Tarantino storyline, and I feel like that doesn't really surface for me lah in this short story. But then if we go with that idea of the contrast between the form and the content, highlighting the repressiveness of the state and the nebulousness of queer love, then I think, yeah, that's something I totally agree with.
And I don't know, what did you think of the story? Do you have a different interpretation of it?
No, that was exactly my interpretation. Without the state classification thing that we brought up just now, I thought that's quite insightful.
Right.
Yeah, because it does feel like it's the state, like trying to define and break up, fragmenting queer love, or like heteronormity or whatever, that is breaking up something that shouldn't be broken up, that shouldn't that shouldn't have to be understood, something that should just be experienced.
Right. And I think something else that stood out to me when reading the story was these images of the lovers inflicting physical pain upon each other. So I think earlier on, Arlene falls down into a ditch, and then Nelly saves her, and they have
Yeah.
this little thing where Nelly picks at Arlene's scabs for some reason, and there's this
Mm-hmm.
very vivid image of like drawing blood. And
Yeah.
I think later on, Arlene meets Nelly after a very long time. This is after Nelly has divorced her husband,
Mm-hmm.
and
So
Arlene
Shing
straight up
Xiong.
like, yeah, as Shing Xiong and Arlene straight up takes a sardine can and hits Nelly in the face.
Yeah.
If I'm not wrong, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know, it was kind of strange to me. I was wondering like, is Amanda trying to hint at a toxic, abusive relationship here? Is
I
their
feel like that
relationship
hints
actually
at how
healthy?
difficult it is for queer people to like form relationships in a
Mm,
heteronormative society. It's because it's so hard for you to like establish a functional relationship that becomes tumultuous and toxic, as evidenced by like the instances of them inflicting harm on each other without them actually wanting to, their love being shown in ways that are not as painless as straight people would express love. I don't know. It's like,
mm,
yeah, like the relationship is much more complex and difficult to navigate, I feel.
Yeah, that's something
Yeah.
I definitely didn't consider. So thank you for bringing that up.
Mm.
Yeah, we also see some interesting uh character comparisons here.
Mm-hmm.
So Arlene and Nelly are foils. Like
Yeah.
Nelly is this sort of self-centered um person who's able to depend on herself,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Arlene she's
It's like completely
for the le-
selfless, and
yeah,
her identity is dependent on her being in love with Nelly, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's best like say in this quote like Arlene was happiest when she could service Nelly's wants, and Arlene was happiest when Nelly was happy.
Mm.
So yeah, what's striking here is there's two different types of lovers being outlined here, and I think maybe that goes back to what we talked about universality
Mm-hmm.
and the reader being able to identify ourselves with at least one of them,
Yeah.
or if not, like an amalgamation of both of them.
Mm. And so it's interesting how like it is the couple that is married that like is the most uninteresting and unexciting, most boring one. Like they just pretend nothing happened eventually and they just get on with their lives
Mm,
without any children, right? And
right,
it's a relationship that doesn't have a marriage that actually approximates true love. Yeah. So I
right.
think that says something about queer love as well, like in heteronormative societies. Maybe the difficulty of forging love actually makes the love even stronger and purer. I don't know.
Mm.
Yeah.
And yeah, that brings us to a very interesting point here. The very last sentence of the story, and I quote,
Mhm.
the deaths, tiny ones, false ones, real ones, we undertake in the name of love are the closest that we ever come to greatness. So yeah, it really links back to what you said about how struggling to build a relationship and struggling to love another person is
Mhm.
best um the best manifestation of love, or one of the
Yeah.
better manifestations.
Mhm.
And I think I'm not sure about uh how bullshit this is, but
Mhm.
I kind of mapped out how death plays into Arlene and Ellie's relationship based on that quote.
Mhm.
And so on the first level, on a very physical level, we see that the relationship is sometimes characterized by uh, tiny deaths. So it's the infliction and toleration of physical pain between the two. So
Uh-huh.
like Nelly plucking at Arlene's scabs and Arlene hitting Nelly in Ching Xiong.
Mhm.
And on another level, on a more metaphysical level, there's also Arlene's death of her ability to love without Nelly, after finding out Nelly is married. And on another level, Nelly, upon spending time with Arlene, we also see the death of her self-centeredness. So in this quote, for context, Nelly and Arlene are at a beach somewhere spending their honeymoon together. Wait, no, not honeymoon, like having a vacation together.
Yeah.
And it says that for once Nelly wasn't obsessively reapplying sunblock to her pigmentation spot or angling her visor to shield the most of her face, because she's genuinely treasuring and cherishing the time that she's spending with Arlene. And of course, on the next level, Arlene's actual death to cancer serves as closure both for herself and Nelly as the two finally move on. And it's also interesting how the story treats the concept of death. It's very it reminds me of Shakespeare again. Death isn't this like ultimate end to everything. It is still inevitable, but it doesn't actually spell out like a complete ending. It's merely a transition to something else. So for example, Arlene dying, right?
Yeah.
But Nelly just moves on quietly. She reconnects with her ex-husband, and they kind of pretend that nothing actually happened. So Nelly just keeps quiet about her relationship with Arlene. And for context, her ex-husband cheated on her, and then that's why they got divorced. And yeah, so the ex-husband also never mentions ex-mistress. And yeah, I think it's all summed up in this quote where they remarried in a quiet civil ceremony and remained childlessly, placidly together through the end of their days.
And actually, when we talk about like the inevitability of death, right? I think it's quite interesting how the story itself began with introducing us to like her breast cancer, right? Because the first question already is like, why didn't Arlene go to the doctor when the lump first appeared? It's like we already know that Arlene has breast cancer and she probably will die at the end. So I think that inevitability of death features quite strongly there. Yeah. And also like the transitioning, like death being a transition to some other point, right? Like death not being a complete ending. And then we mentioned Shakespeare. You know how I think in one of Shakespeare's sonnets, he writes in his verse, this love will continue living, right? That literature will trump mortality and all. And I think that's what the narrator does for Arlene and Nelly as well in this ballad. Like even though after they die, the love still lives on in the form of this ballad, this text. Yeah. Yep.
And speaking of Shakespeare, that's a very small comment. There's also a segment in the story where the narrator talks about Arlene painting faceless women.
Yeah.
Because she knew that if she ever tried to paint her face, it would look like Nelly, and she couldn't afford to see Nelly ever again at that point of time when Nelly was married. And yeah, I think if I recall correctly, it also reminds me of another Shakespearean sonnet where the speaker in that sonnet basically talks about him seeing his lover's face everywhere. And yeah, this entire story is so.
Wait, I have the
There's
collection.
so many like references.
Yeah, I have the collection. My bookshelf are like so far away. I'm not gonna bother flipping through to look for that sonnet now. Oh, but that's so interesting.
Yeah, so many like
yeah.
so many Shakespearean references here.
Yeah.
I mean the very infliction of physical pain is already quite reminiscent of the cruel mistress as well, right? In the Petrarchan convention.
Interesting. And actually, like even if you talk about Shakespeare's sonnets, right? A few of his sonnets were dedicated to his male lover, and then the rest to the female lover. I think his wife, right? And like it's kind of the same in this story. Like Arlene and Nelly, they have this side relationship, but eventually, just like Shakespeare's sonnets, it goes back to the straight relationship. Yeah.
Right. Just quite slaveful.
And yeah, think for me, like the most poignant moment in the story was at the wedding banquet. Like Arlene said Yam Sing for a really, really long, and then Nelly looks at her for the first time that
Mm,
evening. I don't know, that's just really poignant for me, lah.
mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
now that you've talked about it, I'm actually quite curious. Uh, did it to you? Did it stand for anything else beyond just Arlene being frustrated?
Um, I mean, I felt like ambiguity of emotions are like, because when you're Yam Sing, you're like you're wishing, you're giving well wishes, right? You're celebrating something. Then like as someone who loves someone else, Arlene loving Nelly, you'd want her to be happy, but then you'd also want her to be happy with you. You wouldn't want her to be happier than she was with you, like to quote Olivia Rodrigo. So I think you want the best for her, but then you also want her. It's like there's a yum sing for really long
Uh,
and then feeling like really painful deep inside. I mean, I could feel the emotions, yeah.
hmm.
But like if you're talking about uh like meta narratively or intellectually, I don't know. That's just like all I got from it, like the emotions.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to comment on? Anything else that you found striking?
Mm, not really. That's all.
Okay,
Yeah.
you want to move on?
Yes.